Now I'd like to introduce the moderator for the remainder of the webinar. Keye Xu is a research associate for the Lotus project, and as a research associate, Keye is dedicated to bridging evidence-based programs and rigorous psychological research with culturally relevant mental health practices to better support children and families in AAPI and immigrant communities. She gained her PhD degree in education with a focus in human development and psychology from the University of California, Los Angeles, with her dissertation exploring the cultural nuances of parenting among Chinese American mothers. So I'll pass along the virtual mic to Keye now.
Thank you, Kristen, and welcome everyone. So first, I will introduce our first speaker, Soo Jin Lee. And Soo Jin Lee is the executive director of Yellow Chair Collective and the co-founder of Entwine Community. As an Asian immigrant, she draws on her own experiences to advocate for mental health. She is also the co-author of Where I Belong, Healing Trauma and Embracing Asian American Identity, and brings a deep understanding of challenges of balancing family value with personal identity, over navigating the in-between space at home, at work, and in societies. So now please join me and welcome Soo Jin.
Hello, everyone. Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I am so honored to be back with the Lotus Project and speaking with you all about EMDR. So it's an exciting topic, and I can't wait to share with you all. Okay, so today, as we were introduced and as you have signed up, we're talking about EMDR, but specifically, we'll be talking about utilization of EMDR for Asian Americans and Asian immigrant children in particular. Next slide, please. So as I was introduced, these are just a list of, what I do. But at the heart of what I do, I believe that I help folks find a sense of belonging. So we do a lot of work around finding our own identity. How do we define our identity as either immigrants or as Asians or Asian Americans or 1.5 generations? So those are a lot of the conversations that I have with folks within my work, whether that's one-on-one therapeutic work or in a community setting as well. And I also wanted to note that I am an EMDR trained clinician, but not a certified EMDR therapist. And today I'm here to present with you all on how I have found EMDR to be supportive of the clientele that I work with. But again, I'm not an expert of EMDR. My goal in the next 20 minutes or so that I have with you all today is going to be around just talking about the general knowledge of EMDR and how we at our practice have adapted EMDR for the best use of the populations that we work with. So there's different perspectives around EMDR, but for me, it's going to be just this part of the presentation is going to be really just the basics of the EMDR. So let's dive right in. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the questions that was posed is, what is EMDR? And then why is it popular? We have plenty of folks actually within our own community members that are finding us at our practice because we have a lot of folks and clinicians that are trained in EMDR. And we do encourage a lot of our therapists to also get trained in EMDR as well. So I'll talk about why that is with us. But first, what is it? Right? Again, this is going to be very basic knowledge for the next 20 minutes with me. So if I can have one sentence definition of EMDR, first, EMDR stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. And it's an evidence-based therapy that helps clients reprocess a traumatic or distressing memories. So for me, EMDR really is not about erasing any kind of memory, although seems to be kind of a lot of general people's understanding of it, that they want to get rid of a certain distressing memory or traumatic memories. And so when people are finding us and asking specifically for EMDR, oftentimes the phrase I hear is like, I'm just trying to get rid of this. And this meaning like this distressing emotions, overwhelming emotions, or imagery that they have about traumatic events. So it's not really about erasing. It's the memories and events that remain part of the story. But it changes, EMDR is changing how those memories are stored in our brain and in our bodies. So the mind-body connection is very important in EMDR, and that's part of the reason why we absolutely also love EMDR. So traumatic memories often feel stuck, like files that have been left open in your computer screens, and it just kind of keeps flashing at different moments. And it's also very draining the energy, whether we know it or not, right? If we're imagining that there's like a file that's like flashing at us. So every small trigger, it reopens it, and as if like the danger is happening right now. As we understand trauma, it lives in our body. And so when those triggers are reopening, and if we're experiencing if that danger is happening right now, then our body is also reacting as if that danger is happening right now too. So EMDR helps the brain reorganize those files and place them back into the correct folders of the past because it belongs into the past, right? And we still know that the memory is there, right? We want to acknowledge that the memory is still going to be there, that the files are not exactly going to disappear or get deleted, but it's no longer going to be hijacking the present moment. And so this is the way that I like to explain to our clients about what EMDR is. So instead of it replaying, these memories are replaying on a loop, like a broken record, the memory becomes like a closed book on a shelf. So we are gonna keep the shelf, but we get to close the book, right? Notice also, as I'm explaining this, that I use a lot of imagery, and I'll explain why that is as well. But I wanted to give a lot of examples of the way that I like to explain EMDR to our clients. And imagery is going to be an important part of the EMDR process, at least for me in the works that I do with our clients. Now, we want to make sure that the goal of whatever we're trying to file away is, again, that when we're ready to re-look at that page in the book again, or take out that file in that computer again, that it's not going to be overwhelming, and that it's not defining the entirety of the storyline of the book, right? It's not defining who we are as an individual. So that is part of the goal. Now, diving a little bit into the population that we work with, for many Asian American clients, I explained that EMDR doesn't erase your history because there is so much shame attached to those traumatic events or distressing memories oftentimes, right? And so I want to make that clear that we're not trying to erase any part of our history, but it helps us to carry that part of our history differently. It creates a little bit of a sense of a freedom. All right, so why is it so popular? Well, first of all, I think just a very easy answer to that is I feel that it became popular because of social media. There is so much talk on the social media around EMDR and trauma treatments. And I think that's a good thing. And the way that I had just explained, sometimes there are different explanations of EMDR that is so condensed in the social media world that people have a hard time actually understanding the process of EMDR. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining about the actual process of EMDR. But also, EMDR is popular because it's research-based and it works. I believe that it works. EMDR is effective for multiple different types of treatments like PTSD, anxiety, depression, and also grief. I do EMDR for some grief work as well, and it's one of the more, I feel, that underrated use of EMDR. especially for many Asian Americans and immigrant clients that I work with. EMDR is structured. And so I get to explain structurally, like what's going to happen next, what are we doing next, what are we doing next? And that puts them into a lot of ease. And it's a gentle approach that feels less intimidating than perhaps talk therapy for most folks, because it doesn't require the repetition of this quote unquote shameful trauma story to be told over and over again verbally. So that's a key element of EMDR that I found it to be valuable for the clients that I work with. Again, we know that a lot of our immigrant families have a very difficult time talking openly about certain parts of the painful moments of their lives, and especially just mental health struggles in general. And so for us to have a model where we can say, you don't exactly have to talk about this over and over and over again, that brings them a lot of sense of closure to be able to process this. All right, next slide, please. So these are the phases of EMDR, and we're going to spend a little bit of time, like I said, going through the different phases of the EMDR. What does that actually look like? So there's 8 phases that I'll be going over, and we'll go over each of these 8 kind of standardized phases. So if we're doing like EMDR by the book, then we're going through these phases. But again, I will be explaining how we're just kind of adapting the different elements of EMDR and how I utilize that with the clients that I work with. The phases of EMDR in a standardized format is like a stepping stone. And so each prepares the way for the next phase. And then all of it together, the goal is that we're creating a sense of safety and structure. All right, so let's go over one at a time. Next slide. So the first 2 is about history taking, treatment plan, and then preparations. So the first phase of history taking and treatment planning. In this phase, we are gathering history and deciding together which memories or experiences is going to be quote unquote targeted for us to begin the actual treatment process. For a lot of Asian Americans and immigrant clients, this might include not just the obvious traumatic events like I had a car accident, right? But it can also be an ongoing stressors like racism, immigration challenges, or even family dynamics. And I'll go over some of these things a little bit more in detail later, but we're gathering history here in this first phase. It's like building a roadmap, identifying both the wounds, of course, we are talking about more traumatic events or difficult events that the client is faced with, but also we're gathering the roadmap for strengths that the client is all bringing in as well. So it's very similar to the history taking of a lot of other modalities, right? Like psychodynamic therapy or CBT, we start by history gathering. So EMDR is very similar in that the first session is very much focused on the history taking and getting a more fuller picture of the person's life. Now, I wanted to note that for a lot of Asian American clients, that phase 1 also allows us to include things like, intergenerational pieces and cultural history taking as part of the treatment plan as well. So for me, there's a lot of folks that are coming in and talking about like high academic stressors or pressures of work, right? The work stressors, those can also be included into this treatment planning process, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about this as well, how we have expanded the phrasing of defining trauma. But all of these different stressors that the client is expressing is all valid, and we want to take that into considerations for history taking. We explore family migration stories as well. That's part of my history taking, as well as cultural expectations. We talk a lot about those in history taking, and I love when people really dive in deeper about their family dynamics. There's also community stigma that sometimes we come in with as well, and we explore those. And so sometimes this first phase of history taking and treatment planning takes more than just one session for me. But again, it's a phase, right? And so we could take as long as we need to with each phase. All right. And then for the preparation phase two, for me, phase two is one of the more important phases of EMDR because this stage is when we're really integrating the mind body focus and building the safety and trust with the clients. So preparation is when clients are learning actual coping skills like grounding techniques, breathing skills, and what EMDR likes to call resourcing before we go into any kind of trauma work, the stressor work that we were talking about when we were doing the history taking portions. And so I actually spend a lot of time with the preparations when it comes to the clients that I work with. We also explain, of course, what EMDR is. And before we get into the preparations, I explain that this might be a portion of time that we spend a lot together, that we want to build a lot of tool in our toolkit. And then I also explain about what bilateral stimulation looks like, because we'll get into that a little bit later. And for a lot of the younger folks that have asked for EMDR from the get-go, like I want to see an EMDR therapist at our practice, then they're coming in and they're expecting the bilateral stimulation to happen like in session 2 or 3 immediately, right? And so then I slow them down and explain to them what the preparations look like before we get into the bilateral simulations. For older folks or immigrants that I work with that may not be very familiar with what bilateral stimulation is, and they might feel a little bit off-put when I explain it to them, I'll just let them know to follow along. I do a lot of explanations about our mind-body connections, and again, remind them that this is just a way that our brain works and the ways that we're going to file the different elements of the distressing things in our lives. Right? And we do that by firing our different parts of our brains. And so I try to simplify the most way possible in explaining what bilateral stimulation is and why we do the things that we do. Again, for a lot of Asian American clients, they like the structure of EMDR. And so I'll let them know that these are the phases and this is what phase we are in. And as a key reminder, I repeat this over and over again for a lot of immigrant families, then I remind them that this is not about fixing what's wrong with you. It's about supporting how your brain and body is going to heal naturally because it already has the ability to heal. All right, next. So phase 3 and 4, it's about assessment and desensitization. So phase 3 is assessment. And in the assessment phase, we are identifying one target memory that we want to look at. And sometimes people have a hard time just like pointing out that one target memory that they want to work with, and that's okay. Because like we talked about, sometimes they're not coming in, they're not saying, well, I haven't had this huge traumatic event like a car accident in my life. I just know that there's this lingering pressure that I'm living with, and I don't know why I'm living with that pressure, right? And that's okay. But we want to be able to visualize these emotions into imagery. Like I said, we do a lot of imagery work, and then go back into moments in our lives where we have felt that pressure. And so we want to go backwards and backwards and backwards into early childhood memories. Okay, so I help people recover some of those memories by starting off in either the body sensations or just an emotion that they're describing. And then we go backwards into the memories. And then we create the image of that memory, right? And so we're going to have the image that represents a memory. We also identify emotions and body sensations that are connected to it, like I just mentioned. And then what we like to call a learned belief that came from it, right? In EMDR, they actually call it a negative cognition and positive cognition, but we rephrase them to be learned belief. And alternative beliefs. I'll go into a little bit more detail in that later, but we identify this learned belief like I am powerless, I am a burden, et cetera, et cetera. And so once we have identified that, we also decide on an alternative belief. Like, I am in control now. I am worthy of care. And these two learned belief, alternative beliefs are going to be the key elements in which that we know that we're making progress in EMDR process. Because what we do is we use a rating scale around these beliefs. So I won't go into any more details of that for the purposes of this training, but just know that there's a scale in which that each individual is actually rating after each session. And that lets us know that we're on the right track, right? Because again, we're not exactly talking about that traumatic event and they're not verbalizing it over and over and over again. So a lot of the questions are posed to me when I explain about EMDR. It's like, so that how do you know that it's working, right? It's because that there's a rating scale. Now, phase 4, the desensitization part. This is where people really truly feel like okay, this is what EMDR is, right? It's the bilateral stimulation portion. It's kind of the heart of the EMDR, right? The preparation and then the desensitization, to me, it's like the heart of the EMDR. The clients bring in, again, we did the assessment, they bring the memory to mind while they're actually engaging in the bilateral simulations. And then bilateral simulations, most people think of them as just the eye movement, but we also utilize tapping, tones, all the sensories that you can think of, as long as we can use them at a left and right differentiations and alternations, then we can utilize those as a bilateral stimulations. And for me, what I have found it to be most effective is that we use multiple bilateral stimulations at the same time. I've heard this from another trainer as well, where there's this like thing called EMDR 2.0 or something, where there's actual dance movements involved with the EMDR process. And so again, the body is such an important part of the healing process. And so the more that I'm utilizing the body, the more I'm utilizing the simulations, multiple different types of simulations, the better. As for the brain processing, the memory begins to kind of lose its emotional intensity as we're continuing the desensitization process. So part of a phrase that I've heard a client explain is like, oh, I kind of feel like this memory that I've been working with you has now been put into a screen, and I'm looking at it a little bit farther away outside of me, and I'm looking at this happening on a screen now. Right. And that's where we want to get to, that we're not having these gripping reactions to these memories. All right, next slide. Phase 5 is installation. And once we have worked on the bilateral simulations and the distress is starting to decrease, and we have gotten to a point where we're like, okay, this distress is definitely reduced, such as that explanation that I had with a client where they're like, oh, I feel like it's kind of outside of me now, right? And we're utilizing the rating scales to know when we're ready for the next phase. Then we're going to strengthen what we have discovered in our assessments as the alternative belief, right? So for example, if the learned belief that we were working through was, I can't be a burden. Like I can't be a burden to the world. I can't be a burden to my family. And then we have identified that the alternative belief that we would like to have is, I am worthy of care. Then we are pairing this new belief, the alternative belief, with that memory, that distressing memory, until the client feels it deeply in their body, not just intellectually. And this is what creates that long-term change, right? So when I am looking at the distressing memories or traumatic events into the screen again, that I can have an alternative belief. It's not attached. That traumatic event, that memory is no longer attached to my identity about who I am, that I'm a burden, right? That we're creating an alternative beliefs around myself, even if I'm looking at it and it's still a distressing event, right? So that's the long-term change that we want to see. Now, we know that this is going to be creating a long-term change, and this is going to be felt in our bodies, not just in our minds, like intellectually, because we go into the next phase, which is the body scan. And the body scan really lets us know if there's any kind of lingering feelings and sensations left over, right? Any kind of tension that is left over in our bodies, we scan for those because our memories may hold onto in our bodies, right? And so we do a body scan and then we notice if there's any kind of tightness, discomfort, tensions in any part of our bodies. So for example, if we notice that in our chest or in our voices, in our throats, then we work on to continue the bilateral stimulations until the body itself can feel calm, as much as I have done the intellectual work of convincing myself, right, that I believe in this now. So it's actually a really felt experience in the body. All right, next slide. Okay, so the last two phases is going to be the closure and the reevaluation. So at the end of every EMDR session, we do a closure. And the closure is very essential because we are opening up a part of them and it's an internal process, right? And so they might have still a huge overwhelming reactions to certain things that they're coming in with. And all of this is not happening in one session, right? And so we open it up and we might be working through multiple sessions. So what the closure allows us to do is towards the end of the session, that when that memory has not exactly been processed fully, then it's okay, and that we bring the client to a calm state. So we are revisiting all the way back into the first phase, the second phase, right? The beginning stage, where we are doing the resourcing techniques, right? And so we're going to revisit that resourcing technique, like a safe place exercise or beam light exercises, whatever grounding techniques that that you are utilizing. EMDR has a set of a lot of those as well, but I know a lot of other modalities do as well, right? And so we are going to be utilizing some of these resourcing technique to make sure that the client feels grounded before they leave the session, right? They're not open raw and they're not overwhelmed. Again, this is really important, not just in EMDR sessions, but in any trauma work that we do with our clients, that we want to make sure that we are setting them up to be able to still live their lives throughout the day and throughout the week after we have had the closure or after we have had the session and the session came to an end. One of the things that I also like to do is assign some of these resourcing techniques for the clients to be able to utilize throughout the week as well. All right. And then the last phase, phase 8, is the reevaluation. So at the start of the next session, we reevaluate. So has the memory remained neutral? Does the alternative belief still feel true? If not, then we continue the work. We also decide if this feels right and the alternative belief still feels true to them, then we decide which target we want to process next. So this ongoing reevaluation ensures that there's progress and the progress is long lasting as well. All right, moving on to the next slide. So why EMDR for Asian Americans and Asian immigrants? Now that you've seen the full process of what EMDR may look like, this matters to me for Asian Americans that I work with in particular, as well as the immigrant clients that I work with, because it addresses and is able to address intergenerational and cultural trauma, allows healing without needing to explain everything verbally. Again, this is a key thing that I repeat over and over again. And it honors silence and privacy, right? And that feels really respectful for the clients that I work with, especially the older clients that I work with, right? We are really acknowledging the shame-based stigma that we live under when it comes to mental health, right? And so to know that there is a little bit of silence and privacy involved, even between the therapist and the client, right? And that feels really respectful for a lot of immigrants that I work with. It's also effective for racial trauma, immigrant family stresses, shame-based beliefs, again, because we are working with the beliefs specifically and having alternative beliefs. And then for me, again, the body-based healing is so important. Next slide. So who is EMDR for? Who it may not exactly be suited for. EMDR people is best suited for people with distressing memories that they feel stuck. And so again, if they don't have an imagery of the memory, that's still okay. If they have this emotion where they're like, okay, this is an area where I feel really stuck in, then we can actually absolutely create imagery that goes backwards, right? Those experiencing triggers, flashbacks, overwhelming emotions, again, those are all very valid. And then clients who want relief without retelling their trauma stories. Who it might not exactly be best suited for. This is really about readiness for EMDR. It's not that we can't do EMDR on these people or these folks, but it's really about just the readiness. Now, one of the readiness that we want to be looking for is that the client is not in active crisis or unsafe situations, such as someone that is currently living in a domestic violence situations. So we want to make sure that they get into safety first and stabilization. And then unmanaged substance use, and then clients with neurological issues that's going to interfere with the bilateral stimulations. And so example would be like a client that has uncontrolled like seizures. And so some form of like the eye movements or tapping that's going to be unsafe for them, right? But for most part, if it's not the neurological medical issues, then for the most part, I would say that EMDR is possible for most folks as long as we get them into that stabilization place. Next. All right, so I talked about a little bit of the widening of the perspective of trauma. And so one of the things that we like to do is redefine trauma for our clients. And traditionally, trauma, when we talk about trauma, especially with our Asian American clients, right, they do see it as something that, like an event, right? One specific catastrophic event. But for a lot of the Asian Americans that I work with, we want to be able to include these chronic cultural intergenerational wounds, right? Including racism, immigration stressors, the silence, the shame. So, for example, many of the clients that I work with, when it comes to their sense of, let's say, perfectionism or the heavy duty of like family responsibilities, then we go backwards into the time when they remember they have acted as a translator for their parents for a doctor's appointments, right? Or at a school. And, these kind of memories, traditional sense, right, in psychology might not exactly say, well, how is that trauma, right? That's not exactly a trauma work, but we expand on our definitions of trauma, and we expand on the knowledge around trauma, that this pressure that this child had to endure in that moment not only is living in that moment, but translates beyond to that moment, and that pressure has never left them, right? And it leads into perhaps some of the things that they talk about now, which when they talk about it, they don't exactly, even the clients don't even relate to it, but oftentimes they'll come in and say, I don't know why, but I have this like freezing reaction to my boss who is telling me what to do. Right. And then we work towards like these moments in childhood where we have had all of these different beliefs and cognitions that has taught us to react in that manner in this moment now as an adult. Right. Next slide, please. All right, so there's this language shift that I talked about, right? So in traditional EMDR protocol, there's a part around negative belief and positive belief, or negative cognition or positive cognition. And so again, for us, the language matters a lot. And so instead of saying negative belief or positive beliefs, we say learned beliefs and alternative beliefs. Because we wanted to introduce this idea that even without explicitly talking about and explaining it, that these cognitions and beliefs that they have inherited in their childhood is learned from survival, and that part of them is still very valid. Right? And that this alternative beliefs presents this idea of a compassionate way of speaking to ourselves. And that part is really important for the communities that I work with. Compassion can feel really, really difficult or even feel suspicious for a lot of our clients that I work with, right? So this alternative belief, the alternative language that we use just opens up the gateway that, okay, I can still acknowledge that what I had believed, how I lived is still valid, right? And so we can hold both space for both things. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so we're gonna end with our last final thing here, which is resourcing and tapping. I wanted to do a little interactive activity with you all, just 1 minute tapping exercise that I wanted to introduce you all to, which is part of the resourcing. So if you would like to participate in this quick 1 minute exercise, then go ahead and plant both feet on the floor. And if you feel comfortable to do so, you can close your eyes or soften your gaze into a space that feels comforting for you. Go ahead and take a deep breath in and out. And go ahead and start to come into mind a calm space or a safe space. And you're going to use all your senses to imagine this space. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? What do you smell? And as you're being in this space in your imagination, you're going to go ahead and place your hand on your shoulders in a butterfly hug. The image is on the screen. And you're going to gently tap left, right, left, right, in that slow pace. Alternatively, you can also tap your thighs as well. You can put your hands on your thigh and you just alternate tapping left, right, left, right. And just be in this space for the next 20 seconds. Okay. When you're ready, we're going to stop tapping and slowly open your eyes. Come back to the space together. And I just want you to notice how calmer you feel, less tension you might feel even in your body. This was a really, really quick exercise of resourcing example. All right, next slide. We are all done with our time for today, and it went by super quick. But what I'll do is I'll answer some of the questions in the chat. I know that there's a Q&A chat as well, and so I'll definitely be doing that. This is my information if you want to reach out to me at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Soo Jin, for your great introduction of EMDR and also the activity that help us get a sense of the process. I think we have like a couple minutes. We can answer those two questions maybe right now. Yeah. So I think in the Q&A section, we have one audience asking regarding the readiness, needs stabilization. And they ask, would self-harm be okay still for someone to be able to use EMDR?
Yeah, I would say that it depends. Everything I know, I hate that when I ask questions and the trainers are like, it depends. But here I am. Yeah, I would say it depends on the where they are in the process of self-harm. I know that for the alternatives to the self-harm, that the bilateral simulations can work really well, the tappings can work really well. And so I would introduce the concept and then see if we can make that into part of the treatment as part of resourcing. And so definitely, we are the EMDR, the bilateral simulation portions of trying to do the trauma work itself and bringing in the trauma into the sessions can wait. But the EMDR process itself definitely can get started, right? Because there's a lot of resourcing that happens. And so to get into that safe place, a stabilization place with somebody that might be self-harming, I think we could do a lot of work with the resourcing.
Yeah. And then thank you for the explanation. I noticed there are two questions on the Q&A regarding the hypnotherapy versus EMDR. I know Daniel is going to touch upon that a little bit, so maybe we can save those two questions after Daniel's presentation. And then there's another question from Abigail regarding the language shift. Ask, do you see family being a huge theme with the work and language shift holds a way to validate the individual while honoring that family piece? So wasn't sure if this cultural theme will be addressed later. So
Yeah. So again, I had the very, very basics, and then Daniel is going to go in a little bit more deeper into the cultural pieces as well. But yes, the one of the reasons why I wanted to have the language shift was because it really does validate the individual in being able to hold the space of the fact that if we call it a negative cognition or negative belief, that there's already a sense of that shame, not only within themselves, but within the whole family, right? That, well, my parents, my grandparents, my ancestors have lived this way for so long and have been having this quote unquote shameful beliefs for such a long time. And how, for me to feel like now I need to just change that to a positive belief really feels disregarding all of the survivals, all of the resiliency also that our history comes with, right? And so this language shift has been a really important process for me when I'm introducing EMDR to my clients, because it really holds and validates all of the different historical elements that we hold within our own identities.
yeah, I remember you also mentioned during the history tracking and preparation phase, you also try to introduce some of the or learn more about the cultural values, so help you understand the client as a whole and how you try to integrate that into your counseling process.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then one of the last thing that I want to note is, again, by having the pieces of honoring our identity, our historical elements, one of the things that I like to do a lot when I'm explaining EMDR as well as when I'm doing the history taking is the portion where I tell them, this isn't actually new. Like it feels new because it's scientific, psychology is now using it. But in fact, throughout our, ancestry, the use of this mind-body work and bilateral simulation has existed as well. And so in like Buddhist temples, the way that they meditate, actually they use a lot of bilateral simulation too. And so I explained that it already exists in our cultures.
I think because of the time, we need to transition to our next speaker, but please feel free, Soo Jin, because we still have some questions in the Q&A chat, and it'll be great if you can answer them and type in your answer as we transition to the next one. So next, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Daniel Wei. So Daniel is a psychotherapist based in San Francisco, California, with about 10 years of clinical experience at community-based agencies. His practice integrates evidence-based trauma therapies with a strong emphasis on attachment, embodiment, and cross-cultural healing. And before becoming a clinician, Daniel worked in China for several years as a translator for group therapy workshops, an experience that shaped his unique sensitivity to language, culture, and the healing relationship. In addition to his clinical work, Daniel is also passionate about supporting therapists through consultation and supervision. So he is an EMDRIA approved consultant and is currently developing innovative video-based training methods to enrich EMDR learning. Okay, Daniel, so welcome, and I will hand the mic virtually to you.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen real quick. All right, perfect. Well, I hope you all get a chance to take a deep breath for some mental break before we dive into more information. My name is Daniel, Chinese Wei Hui. I am a licensed clinical social worker, also a consultant in EMDR. I have been providing supports for EMDR trained therapists towards their certification process. I also see myself as a integrated therapist. I'm trained in internal family system, sensory-motor psychotherapy, which is a body-based approach, and psychedelics assisted therapy. Here's my website. Feel free to take a look at that and reach out to me with any questions you have. I have also listed my email in other slides. Okay. So here are some of the learning objectives. I'm hoping that by the end of today, you will be able to tell what is EMDR and what is not, and hopefully deepen your understanding about EMDR as a trauma-focused therapy, not just trauma-informed. We're going to bring some neuroscience to understand how transformative change occurs in the neural level and identify some common elements across different treatment modalities because there are a lot of them out there. And I want to acknowledge that this 30-minute seminar or presentation is not going to prepare you with, enough tools or competency to support clients in their trauma recovery. I'm hoping through this presentation, you will cultivate some interest in getting your own training in some of the commonly known trauma modalities out there. Okay. So let's talk about some myths. EMDR has gained some significant hype on social media recently. However, its popularity has also led to widespread misunderstanding and myth about this treatment modality. You may have heard that EMDR is a magic wand and a quick fix therapy. EMDR may have been branded as a brief therapy, but in reality, it really requires careful preparation and pacing so that clients are able to stay what we call as dual awareness, meaning the ability to stay grounded enough while processing traumatic memories. Many people associate EMDR as a technique. So you might hear clients therapy saying that clients is not ready for EMDR or maybe are not good fit for EMDR. I want to emphasize that EMDR is a comprehensive model that views symptoms through a trauma lens. EMDR is used to treat phobia, anxiety, panic, depression, etc. And EMDR involves more than just phase 4, like Soo Jin sharing earlier, the trauma processing. All the efforts before and after are equally important and part of the framework. And people talking about, I saw some question about hypnosis. I don't know much about hypnosis, but EMDR is not hypnosis. In fact, we want clients to be fully awake and aware in order to maximize the best outcome. Also, lots of people associate or equal EMDR as eye movement, as if the eye movement itself is doing the tricks. But healing doesn't come from eye movements themselves, but from a deep notice while connecting to corrective experience that disconfirms these maladaptive beliefs from trauma. And we're going to unpack this in the later slides. Does EMDR erase traumatic memories? EMDR doesn't erase memories, but can help clients develop a different perspective and relationship with these memories, usually in a less distressing and more manageable way. How do I explain EMDR to clients? For clients, I want them to let them know that trauma isn't just in your head, it's also in your body. And that's why at times, even though your mind knows you're safe, your body still reacts. And EMDR is not a cognitive processing. It actually includes the mind and the body and supports your natural capacity to heal. And we're going to talk about what does it mean that everyone has this natural capacity to heal. In sessions, I want clients to know that their role is simply to follow the bilateral stimulation, tapping, eye movement, while gently noticing any images, thoughts, emotion, or sensation that come up as a traumatic memory is activated. For people who are familiar with mindfulness, here the noticing is basically the essence of a mindfulness practice. And I also want to let clients know that they're always in control, that we only move at a pace that feels right and safe for you. And for professionals like everybody here, EMDR is a memory model. We work with the traumatic memory. And EMDR is grounded in an adaptive information processing model, AIP. And this model proposes that trauma blocks the integration of distressing memory with adaptive memory network. And I want to pause here because it is mouthful. But what it basically means is unprocessing trauma can feel like an isolated island in a vast ocean, maybe hidden away in your unconsciousness or little access to awareness, and making it difficult to connect into other islands that hold other life experiences. Yeah, so as a result, aspects of these traumatic events remain unmetabolized, unprocessed. In EMDR, we believe that symptoms such as flashback and intrusive thought are a result of this unprocessed trauma. And EMDR targets these unprocessing memories, facilitating their reprocessing and integration into a more adaptive neural network. So that would be building a bridge or lighting up a bridge to the other islands. So a more adaptive belief would be, oh yeah, sorry, one thing that I forgot to unpack that the first. So example would be, for people who survive a car accident may hold on to this belief that danger is everywhere and dismissing hundreds of car rides that were totally safe before. Yeah, it becomes an isolated island. In EMDR, we're hoping for them to connect into other experiences. So an adaptive information or belief would be, the world can be dangerous, but I have choices and the capacity to keep myself safe and still enjoying life. Okay, now let's bring the tip of neuroscience to understand trauma and its treatment. In short, neuroscience is the study of our nervous system, which includes our brain, the spinal cord, and all the fibers in the body that communicates to and from the brain. And neuron is the basic unit of our nervous system. And there are 86 billion neurons in the brain, also known as brain cells. And I want to pause here so that the number can sink. 86 billion. That's about 11 times of the world's population. And imagine each person is talking to the other one, like what's going on inside of us in our nervous system. Neurons communicate with one another through electrical and chemical signals. And you can imagine this sheer amount of communication patterns and communication patterns within our nervous system. And together they form really complicated, intricate pathway between the brain and to the body. So this is known as neural networks. In EMDR, we call it memory networks. And for each individual externally, we experience all these neural pathway as perceptions, thought, feelings, sensations, impulses, like what is showed in the picture here. So as you're hearing this presentation right now, your brains are, firing. Neurons are firing, communicating, and form a pathway. If this is the first time you heard about this theory, this pathway may feel weak and fragile and may not really last. It may eventually fade away. However, if you have heard about neural network and neural communication before, the old pathway may get strengthened. So here comes the question, why certain memories are stronger than the others? Why we remember certain things better than the other? Yeah. what we have learned that is strong emotional experiences, such as trauma or positive experience like graduation or wedding, form stronger neural networks due to the release of chemical. And in trauma, that would be cortisol and norepinephrine. And it makes sense, this strengthened neural network is so crucial because it helps us to, it ensure easy activation for survival purposes. So an example would be if someone is getting bitten by a snake during a hike, it makes sense this person's nervous system is so quick to respond to any coiled objects because the mind's primary goal is to ensure your safety. And so what happened to trauma? How does trauma impact this healing? Trauma disrupts the brain's neural network. Oh, one thing I want to add, because I think it's important, I didn't write it here. Repetition also strengthens the neural network. So think of how habits are formed, or the saying that practice makes perfect. And in neuroscience, you also hear that what fires together, wires together. I have Sophia here. Yeah, and this also help explains why traumatic trauma can take longer to heal. Because the brain has practiced these trauma-driven responses for so many times that this neural network is deep wired in our body, in our nervous system. So in therapy, we're literally working with clients to unwire this pattern. The good news is it's possible. Okay. And trauma disrupts the brain's natural connection to adaptive information, leaving these traumatic memories as isolated memory islands like what we talked about in the previous slide. And why would that happen? How did that happen? There's a consequences of part of our brain temporarily going offline, and that is the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus. And these two parts of the brain are responsible for meaning making and contextualizing the event. Without these two brains online, past feels like present. Okay, we're going to skip this video, but feel free to look it up online to help you better understand how experience creates this neural connection and how neurons communicate, with our consciousness. All right, now let me bring a case example to help you better understand how experiences form and reinforce, strengthen this neural network that we see as habits of, thought and etc. So imagine this is a client who grew up in poverty with parents who were always busy at work. Emotional attunement was rare, and the client was often left with a babysitter who was emotionally abusive. When the client was older, they were tasked with caring for their younger siblings and translating for their parents, which is really common within, this Asian community. They received little validation from their parents who were stressed from work. Instead, the client's mother often vented to her, suspected that the father was having an affair. As the client grew older, their parents would brag about their good school performance to relatives, but rarely offer direct praise. When the client became an adult and moved out, their parents only reached out when they needed help. I have worked with this client for some time, and through some collaboration and support, she identified this deeply seated belief that I'm worthless unless I contribute. Okay, we talk about memory network, and now let's take a look at, memory reconsolidation. I want to acknowledge this may be something new. If you haven't heard about that, don't worry, you can always come back and review and also look it up online. This theory is developed by Bruce Ecker, who also developed his own treatment modality therapy called coherence therapy. I really appreciate this theory because it explains how change happens, how it happens in the neural level, and why different treatment modalities may achieve similar and the same, if not the same, treatment outcome. And maybe it is true that there's no single one, trauma-focused therapy that is superior to the other. So, researchers once believed that memories, when they consolidated, when they're formed, they're permanent. There's nothing you can do to unlock this connection. But the latest research has found out that memories or this neural network, memory network, when they get activated, when they get recalled, will become temporarily malleable with a 5-hour window, during which the space that connecting to two neurons literally loosen up for different formation. So this neural connection can be altered, adapted before restabilizing into long-term memory. And this theory is very much in line with neuroplasticity. I think many of us have heard of. And the belief is our brain is constantly changing thanks to its adaptability. And Bruce Ecker simplifies this process into 3 different steps. The first one is activate target memory. And this step may sound simpler or easier than what it is in real practice, because it requires the therapist to form a clear case conceptualization that explains how past event, how past trauma continue to impact the present behaviors. Because rarely you would have clients coming in a session telling you that I have this deeply belief that I'm worthless. And I believe that because of lack of validation, attunement, being parentified as a child. So let's work on those traumatic memories. But instead, most clients come into a session with complaints about emotional dysregulation, difficulty developing meaningful relationship, insomnia, depression, eating disorder, etc. And once we identify a target memory, that's when we activate support clients to bring this target memory into awareness. And EMDR, that's phase 3, like Soo Jin shared earlier. And please note that this is not merely recalling facts and details, because facts and details is only part of the neural network. It requires both the mind and the body. And that's why in phase 3, we ask people about their current emotion when they think about the stress memory, how their body still remembers the traumatic events. And then the second step is to introduce these confirming experiences. Here I borrow a quote from Thomas Zimmerman, who has made significant contribution to the EMDR community in recent years. And he summarized that humans heal when we activate a difficult experience and immediately have an experience that confirms this expectation in the bad memory. I'm going to share a personal story later to hopefully unpack what he meant here. And EMDR phase 4, the target on desensitizing the traumatic memories. We believe that clients have this natural capacity to connect into adaptive information. But in real practice, we also recognize how clients get there varies, especially for folks who are dealing with traumatic survivors of complex trauma. Some thorough preparation is often needed. And then comes to our second step, the third step, which is to consolidate, to stabilize this newly found neural network. If the old belief is like a beaten path that had been walked 1,000 times, this newly found belief after step 2 may feel like a newly formed route in the field that is barely visible yet. Therefore, it requires intentional repetition through actions and taking healthy risk. And let me share a personal story. Let me first take a deep breath first, and let's just pause here because I acknowledge there's a lot of information here. Yeah. So I'm hoping to, through this personal experience that you may better understand how these 3 healing steps take place in real life, or in the therapy the session room. So for many years, I carried this belief that there's something wrong with me for being gay, and that's shaped by culture and family. And this belief lives deeply in my implicit memory and influence how I anticipated in social situation, often expecting rejection and judgment. Recently, I went to a barbecue where I was the only gay man. And you can imagine immersing myself in a situation like that immediately lined up, activate my old belief, my target, my neural network. And please know that this is not a conscious process, right? The brain does itself and default me into this protective mode by maybe putting on a facade or disengagement. So the step one, that's the step one. And luckily, at this gathering, there was a disconfirming experience happened, and that people were warmly welcome me and were genuinely curious about my relationship. So that became an aha moment, had a felt sense in my body that a corrective experience that directly contradicted what my brain had been making for years. But is that it? Am I healed from one single event, from one single experience? No, it actually requires me to take ongoing healthy risk to engage life in a more authentic way, to eventually consolidate and solidify this adaptive belief that I am okay the way I am. And we're going to skim through these two slides because there's for the sake of time. But there are some common elements shared through different trauma modalities. And some of them include the ability to name and differentiate feeling, sensations, and thoughts, and the ability to be with that experience without resorting to protective mode. And also the ability to assess corrective experiences, maybe supporting clients to build on, to strengthen, to access their imagination for corrective experiences. And face-oriented treatment, this is a guiding principle for most trauma therapy. So basically what it means is we want to make sure that clients are stable enough, that they are able to feel safe enough with their body, their emotion, before we open up those traumatic memories. And the goal here to prevent them from re-traumatizing or destabilizing. Just know that this slide is available for review afterwards, so feel free to take your own pace to take a look at it. All right, now let's turn to a case study to see how EMDR works in practice. And my encouragement is for you to think about how memory consolidation take place as I share this case. 1 second. So here T stands for me as a therapist, and C is client. Hi, what's present with you today? Anything new since we last talked? Honestly, it has been quite stressful. I've been tuning out more. With my dad in chemotherapy, my parents have been calling a lot, asking for help with doctor's appointments and all kinds of little things. Historically, they only call me when they need something. Part of me wants a break, but then I feel guilty because I know this is when they need me the most. I'm also frustrated they don't reach out to my brother as much, and I can't help but feel panicking whenever the phone rings. It sounds like different parts of you are pulling in different directions about how to respond, huh? And it makes sense that another part may want to tune out, especially when there isn't a clear solution. Yeah, it's frustrating. I do want to help, but it just feels overwhelming. That seems like a natural segue from what we explored last time. Your long-held belief, I don't have any value unless I contribute. And that belief it often drives the urge to fix, right? These parts may be showing up strongly right now in your situation with your parents. How about we pay attention to those parts first? And from there, we can look at how you want to approach your dad's reaching out. I'm open to that, but still visibly distressed. I wonder what might be the deep core belief underneath I don't have value unless I contribute. I want to pause here just so that you know this slide is all about phase 4 activation. And client respond with some support. I think I'm worthless. That's a learned belief. Thank you for thank you for staying with that. As we explore this belief system, is there a memory that comes up, one that connects performance and contribution to your sense of value? Yeah, I remember when I was 8 and my parents were going through financial difficulties. I took all my money. I took all the money I had saved in my piggy bank, about $200, and gave it to them. At the time, I felt proud, but looking back, it feels so sad. That's a powerful memory. $200 is an enormous amount for a child. As you connect with that sadness, where do you notice in your body? I feel tension in my chest and in my lower back. If you were to measure how disturbing this memory feels right now on a scale from 0 to 10, with 0 being is in the past, doesn't feel bothered anymore, or 10 being it feels like it's happening now, where would you put it? And client reported 8. Before we start, let's check in with that part of you that tunes out. Does it feel okay to continue with processing today? So this is me making sure that all parts are on board, that they're able to actually activate the memory. Yeah, I think I'm ready. Okay, hold the image of yourself at 8, giving your saving to your parents. Notice the younger part of you who carried the old belief, I am worthless unless I fix problems for other people. Stay with the sadness and with the tension in your chest and lower back. Now just follow the eye movement. So this is the bilateral stimulation. Usually lasts about 20 seconds. And after each set, I would usually ask them, what do you notice? And client reported, I feel vibration through my body. It feels like anger. Notice that and just let it move through. So here, this anger begins in her chest and spreads into her arms. And clients recognize that she hasn't rarely allowed herself to feel anger towards her parents because of the guilt tied to their struggles. So here, there's a movement of body sensation. Go with that. After second set, clients reported, I feel sadness is heavy. Can you stay with the younger part who carries sadness and just let it feel your presence, your adult self's presence? Here, I'm using the pause language to create distance, the dual awareness, so that they are able to be with whatever comes up. So bilateral stimulation. And clients reported, I remember the babysitter, the sexual charmer. I feel sad that my parents left me with her. That sadness made sense. And the association with the charmer is natural. See if you can offer that younger part safety now. Maybe imagine her protected in a place that feels secure. And client visualize herself in a zoo protected by animal and feel increasingly calmer as the image strengthens. In trauma treatment, sometimes the capacity to contain distress and remain within the window of tolerance is so essential because at that moment, we are not ready to open up a bigger memory. I'm going to speed up a little bit because I recognize the time. Step 4, I feel sleepy. Let's check in. Is this the tuning out used to protect yourself before? No, it feels different. I can still feel my body. I check in and she recognized that the sleepiness is a release rather than a shutdown. And she was able to noticing the body soften as letting go of holding tensions for years. After 5 sets, the disturbance is lower, maybe a 4. Notice what needed to happen but didn't happen back then. so your body can fully know this memory is in the past. Here I bring in somatic therapy because trauma is often understood in somatic therapy. Trauma is often understood as thwarted survival instinct, which means all the defense and protective actions were not complete and remain stored in the body. And at set 6, I see how I've been playing small in relationship and even at work. Like at work, I normally stay quiet and just do my own thing. Yeah, the past often finds a way to live in the present, huh? Go with that. So here, Key's link, emerges, that this link emerges between childhood survival strategy and their pattern in adulthood. And here insight arises that these strategies were once served as protection, but are now outdated. And after the 5 set, she reported, I'm feeling calmer. Good. The old belief tells you that you are worthless. And I'm curious, what would be a preferred belief moving forward that will replace this outdated belief? I'm not sure. That's okay. Give yourself a little time. I can also suggest a few options and you can see which one fits. Then you can adjust it to make it truly your own. And a client reported, I'm worthless. I'm worthy regardless of what I do and don't do. Terrific. Now, as you hold this belief, go through your memories and tell me a time in recent years when you felt valuable and simply for being you. And after a pause, client reported, yes, at the treatment center. The kitchen staff remember everybody's food preference, and I felt cared for just being me. Other people felt the same way. Now hold the sense of being valued together as with the old belief from the piggy bank memory. And go with that. So here, this is where the contradictory, the corrective experience was introduced. As she holds two contrasting experience side by side, her distressing level drops sharply to 1 from 8. And the shift comes not just from a cognitive reasoning, but from a full body mind knowing. And this created a powerful disconfirmation that supports transformative healing. And from there, we did the installation with a new belief, did a body scan. We also introduced a future template when she embodied this new belief in the workspace. And also imagine her, picturing her, the phone rings and her parents calling, maybe with guilt-tripping language. So this is feel like most of a complete session, but we won't be able to go through all of them. Okay. So just want to quickly summarize. Sorry that we went over some time. When trauma happens, neurons in the brain and the body form pathways that carry the same feelings and belief as if the event was still happening. And in EMDR, we helps to reactivate these pathways, supporting clients in connecting with healthy information and rewires the neuron connection so that they can live with new belief and deepen this self-connection and healthy relationship. And that's it for here. We still have a few more minutes for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. And I really appreciate your including such a depth of the case example here. And I encourage everyone. So our presentation, the recording will be shared and as long as the slides from the speakers. So I really encourage everyone to read through the case study and to understand how the different process phases and how bilateral stimulation works in this case. I think for time, we probably have only 1, 2 questions, but there's one thing I really want to ask. I know Daniel have experiences using EMDR with clients in different languages. And do you have any suggestions, things we're working with Asian population and that comes with different languages? Do you have any suggestions when we use EMDR in another language? What are things we need to be cautious? What are the recommendations?
Yeah, I'm very grateful that I used to work as a translator, so they came in handy. And currently, I also I'm working with mostly Asian population and the queer community. So I really get to translate EMDR into Mandarin and Cantonese. One thing that I found really helpful is to work with a consultant, work with someone who actually use that language for practice. And in fact, most of my consultees come to me because I speak Mandarin. And for folks who would like, learn more about this cultural adaptation, maybe look into if the manual, the EMDR manual, is translated into a language. And so if you can have read through them, that would be really helpful. The other one is like what I said earlier, maybe, work with a consultant that it has experience with a different language.
Thank you. And maybe we have time for another question. I think that will be the last one. So what is from your observation, what are the main differences utilizing EMDR with younger population versus more like a grow-up adult population? And what are the cautious things need to be care about?
Yeah, there's definitely some adaptation needed for working with children. Because in EMDR phase 3, we ask clients to activate this memory, and we ask them what image represents the memory. We ask them about their cognitive, their cognition, their negative belief about who they are. And this may be too difficult for younger child. So what I've been doing is first, again, create safety. And sometimes, using play therapy is a good way to activate this memory network. There's an online web called Sentry. I believe it's called an online Sentry, where you can use objects to represent different experiences. So this is one way. And regarding tapping, sometimes clients we can bring some toys to activate this left and right stimulation. Another thing is have their parents to tap on their shoulders. But that also requires some collaboration with the parents.
And relationship building with the parents as well.
So yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel, so much for your great presentation and your detailed explanation. I think because of the time, we will stop here. And I know Soo Jin has helped answer a lot of questions on the Q&A. And I think we'll have the webinar open a little longer. So everyone, please, if you have time, take a look at the Soo Jin's answer in the Q&A part. And yeah, thank you, Soo Jin and Daniel, for joining us, sharing your knowledge on EMDR. And thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you so much for everyone, again, like Keye said, and thank you to our speakers. And also thank you to Keye for moderating and facilitating the questions and the discussions today. Just as a reminder, if you have any more questions, feel free to email the speakers. Their emails will be shared on our Lotus project website. Also, as you can see in the chat, please fill out the webinar evaluation form that Min sent out, as it will help us improve future webinars for all of you. And again, just as a reminder for the CE credits, if you did not mark that you need CE credits in the registration for the webinar, please contact us about it. And again, our email is lotusproject@phi.org.